Alright, let's take this spreadsheet here. It looks kind of ugly and boring, and let's dress it up just a bit by adding some subtle formatting to make it look like this. Now for the first step, I'm going to zoom out just a little bit so that I can see everything we're working on all at once. Alright, now since this is a grade book, all of these cells right here are going to be holding a 2-digit or maybe a 3-digit grade. So I want to shrink those down so we can kind of get a feel for how everything's going to fit eventually. So I'm going to select columns C through N, and I'm just going to shrink that down to what I think would be maybe a 2-digit column. Now you'll notice if the cell gets too small to display a numeric value, it turns it into little pound symbols. If it's just plain old text, it just chops it off. So I want to make sure it's at least big enough to hold the date there, since we did choose a small date format. Okay, so let's start formatting. We're going to have three parts. We're going to look at the header, the dates, and then the student section. Now the header, I want it to really stand out. So I'm going to select all the header area. I'm going to make sure it's 12 point. That's going to be the biggest type I'm going to use. We're going to make it bold, and I want to make this have a little splash of color. We're going to put some blue in there. And I could just choose, like maybe this blue and some white text to make it stand out. The one thing about that particular color blue is it's almost radioactive. It's a little bright for to print it out. It's a little harsh, I think. I really try not to use these standard colors. They don't look great on screen, and they don't look all that great when they're printed out. They're just a little extreme. I usually like to try to use some more subtle colors. But I want to show you some other options if you're really picky about color. You could go down here to more colors, and they have the whole color wheel here. I could just pick a color right out of the wheel. Now, being your typical guy, I'm not that great with color, so I can't pick anything great, but I could pick a shade and make it lighter or darker. I can also use the magnifying glass, which this is technically supposed to be an eyedropper icon. But when I click that, it lets me pick any color on my screen, and it will change it to match that color. So I could actually pull up the web page and try to match the color as close as possible. It's a little hit and miss sometimes with the exact accuracy. I could also go through here. There's different ways to pick colors. I can even pick it out of the crayon box. But kind of like I like to use the Home Depot technique sometimes. You can choose your color by exact shade. And I like to choose the RGB and specify how much red, green, and blue. So if you were picky and wanted to match the exact color I had, you don't have to. But I chose 22, 92, and 163. And that's how I got the color that I did. Much more subtle blue, not so blinding. Okay, one problem though is I can't read any of the titles anymore. I mean, I want good strong headers, but now I can't read them because the columns are so skinny. So I want to kind of stand the text up vertically. So with it still selected, I'm going to go to Format, Cells, and under Alignment, I could go over here and stand it straight up like the old style grade book, but to give it a little more style, I'm going to put it on the second big dot, which is 45 degrees. And now I can actually read, well, almost all of my titles. We'll fix that in a moment. Okay, so I have blue background, white text, bold, and 12-point font. Now let's go to the date area. I'm going to select all the way across there, and we're going to be a little simpler on color now. I'm going to make this a kind of a tannish color. I'm just going to go with the lightest color of this column, and I'm going to make the text just a little bit lighter. Just take a little bit of the edge off the text. I'm going to make it smaller because it's not as important as the headers. I'm going to make it a 9, and I'm also going to go ahead and make it italic just to make it really offset and stand out, make it a little more subtle. Okay, I would also like to actually merge these two boxes, the date because I'm not going to put anything else in there. So I'm going to merge that together, and I'm actually going to put a colon in here. I'm just being a little OCD about it, I guess. Okay, so now let's look at the student area. I'm going to select all of this area, and I'm going to make this 11 point, just a little smaller than the header area, not bold. And one thing I like to do is add striping, kind of like those old style grade books where you'd have 2 or 3 lines of green and then 2 or 3 lines of maybe white, or sometimes they do dark green, light green. I'm just going to do something really subtle here. I'm going to choose the first 2, and I'm going to choose the lightest green I can. Very, very subtle. Now the next 2, I like to leave those white, so I'm not going to do anything. But I already have a little bit of a pattern here. I have 2 green, 2 white, and I don't want to have to do this pattern over and over. I'm going to be lazy. So I'm going to go up here to my Format paintbrush and just click it. And that's kind of like dipping the paintbrush in the color. So now you'll notice my icon has a paintbrush beside it. I'm going to click and hold right on Scooby there and select to the last column and let go, and it will copy and paste my pattern. Even if it doesn't match up perfectly, green, white, there wasn't one to make white, it still understood the pattern, still worked. Having these zebra stripes really help when you're trying to read across. Your eyes don't slip off the line. And you could do 3 and 3 or 2 and 2. Not really picky, totally your choice. I just decided to do 2 because it kind of lines up nice and even there. Alright, so next let's add some borders. So if I select all the cells, I could just go and do a basic border, and notice that made our last column readable there. But for me, I really feel like that's distracting. I want the borders to just barely be there, just be enough to really kind of offset the boxes so I can see where the lines are. I also don't like for my borders to be as dark as the text because it just makes it hard to read. We really want to settle that out quite a bit. So I'm going to select all those cells again. This time I'm going to go to Format, Cells, and under Border I'm going to choose one of the dotted shapes. I'm going to go really wide dots and add that. That's a little better, but I still feel like it's kind of dark. It's really distracting. My eyes are really drawn to it. So I'm going to go back in there. And under here, I'm going to make the color. I'm going to choose this really light gray here at the top. Click Outline and Inside again. There we go. That's much more subtle. They're just barely there. Now, when I look at the header area, however, I kind of like to make those white, kind of match the text. So I'm going to select just the header, Format, Cells, and I'm going to make this a white border. Outline inside. Much better. Okay, let's wrap this up and clean it up just a little bit. One other thing I'm noticing is that the names seem kind of tight together to me now that we have the borders. It seems like everything's almost touching. So I'm actually going to do this for the date column as well. I'm going to give it just a little more space. I'm going to click in between the 2 and the 3. Just give it a little bit of breathing room. There we go. That's a little better. Now, one last problem I'm noticing. I don't like that the headers are right against the border. I don't like the date right against the side, and I don't like that the student names are near the bottom. To really give it some breathing space, let's get everything away from the edges. So I'm going to start out by selecting all these cells, and I'm going to horizontally center it, or I guess I should say vertically. Sorry. I'm going to vertically center it to kind of move things up into the middle of the box. That way it has some spacing top to bottom. Now for the date and for the header, I'm going to also horizontally center it. And if it doesn't do it automatically, because I already had this center before, sometimes you have to hit the button more than once. When I practiced this I had to, but it worked just fine for me there. Okay, so let's unselect and look at that. I'm thinking that looks quite a bit better. If yours is not to your liking, Don't hesitate to resize some of the columns or some of the rows. Give everything just a little bit of breathing room so it has space, and it really makes it a lot easier on the eyes and easier to read. Now, as always, we've reached a new milestone, so let's save our work. Since I already named it, it didn't ask me for another name. If I wanted to make a separate file, such as maybe different versions, I could choose Save As and maybe name it Excel 103B. I'm just going to keep with what I've got for now. I'll see you in the next video.